Hi guys, and welcome to Calm Night Radio Channel. Tonight we step into a place that looks quiet at first glance, almost peaceful in the weak blue light before sunrise, and yet holds a life of strain in every furrow, every cabin, every drifting thread of white. What was it actually like to wake in the cotton fields of 1830 to feel the day begin before the sun itself had fully arrived, and to know that the land around you would ask everything from your hands? You can almost hear the faint rustle already, the low stir of people rising, the creak of wood, the distant cough of someone meeting another hard morning. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And while you're here, comment below with your location and your local time. Now, dim the lights, and let yourself enter the long first moments of an ordinary day in the cotton south, where the rows are dark, the air is damp, and the work waits patiently. Like something that never truly sleeps, you wake before dawn, not because your body's refreshed, but because the day has claimed you early. The air inside the cabin feels stale and close. Wood walls hold the memory of yesterday's heat, though the morning itself has a slight chill. You feel the roughness of a blanket that has done its duty for years too long. Somewhere nearby, someone shifts on a pallet of corn husks. A child gives a small sleepy sound, then falls quiet again. Outside, a rooster starts with theatrical confidence, as though he personally controls the sun. He does not, of course, but he tries. You sit up into darkness that is slowly turning grey. The floor under your feet feels uneven and cool. Your clothes are plain, worn, and practical, the kind that rub the skin raw if given enough hours, which they always are. Linen, wool, coarse cotton, homespun cloth, each thread chosen less for comfort than for endurance. Historians agree that enslaved field workers in the American South were often issued very limited clothing each year, and what you wear is expected to survive labour, weather, and constant repair. It rarely does so gracefully. The smell inside the cabin is a mixture of smoke, earth, old wood, and human closeness. It is not one single odour, but layers of living pressed tightly together. Ash from last night's fire lingers in the air. Damp soil clings to shoes and hems. There may be a faint scent of cornmeal, or salt pork if fortune was generous. Though generous is not a word that belongs here often. You know the morning by smell almost as much as by sight. When the door opens, cool air slips in. It touches your face like a small mercy. Outside, the plantation is beginning to stir. The sky is pale at the edge, washed with silver and weak violet. Mist hangs low over the ground in some places, softening the edges of fences and cabins. For a brief moment, the world looks gentler than it is. Morning can be rude that way. It dresses hardship in pretty colours. You step out and hear the layered soundtrack of the waking place. Buckets clink, feet press dirt. Voices stay low, measured, careful. Somewhere farther off, livestock shift in their pens. A horse stamps, an insect hum begins, thin and steady. A dog barks once, then again, annoyed by everything and useful to no one at this exact moment. The soundscape is not loud, but it is full. Nothing here is truly still. The fields lie beyond, not yet bright, but already visible in their shape. Long rows, endless rows, it seems. Cotton in 1830 is both plant and command. It fills the landscape with low shrubs, broad leaves, green boles turning toward white fibre, and all the promise of profit for people who will not pick it themselves. You look across the ground and see order imposed on nature, straight lines, repeated again and again, until distance turns them into pattern. The field feels larger than reason. Cotton is often imagined as soft. That is the little trick it plays on memory. The finished cloth may feel light against the skin of a distant buyer in Liverpool or New York. The plant itself is another matter. The stems can be woody. The dried burrs can prick and scratch. Dust rises. Bits cling. Nothing in the field is arranged for tenderness. Certainly not toward you. There is breakfast. If it can be called that without sounding too festive, a quick meal may be made from cornmeal, perhaps mush or hoe cake, plain and filling in the strictest sense, Maybe molasses if supplies allow it. Maybe nothing extra at all. Food is fuel here, not pleasure, and even as fuel it is rationed with a stingy hand. You eat quickly because time itself feels rationed. The taste is simple, dull, familiar, warm if you're lucky, more often, only enough. One small scholarly debate still lingers around the exact daily rhythms from plantation to plantation, because records vary and owners like to flatter themselves in writing. Some accounts describe carefully timed bells and tightly organised routines, while others suggest a rougher pattern shaped by season, weather, and the temperament of whoever held power that day. What does seem clear is the larger truth. Dawn did not ask whether you were ready. As the light grows, the human order of the place becomes easier to see. People gather, some carrying tools, some adjusting clothes, some moving with the practiced economy of those who have no energy to spare. Faces are serious, often unreadable from a distance. Not because feeling is absent, but because feeling is private when privacy itself is scarce. You learn to keep certain thoughts behind the eyes. Children are visible too, though the youngest may remain behind for now. Their presence changes the feeling of the yard. A small hand reaches for an older one. Someone bends to tie a loose wrapping or smooth a child's hair. There is care even in haste, especially in haste. Affection does not vanish under pressure. It becomes brisk, clever, and fiercely efficient. A supervisor may appear mounted or on foot, depending on the plantation and the hour. His role is simple in theory and cruel in practice. Keep people working, watch, count, push, record. The whole system depends on turning bodies into output, and output into money. By 1830, cotton has become central to the economy of the American South, driven by enormous international demand after the cotton gin made processing short staple cotton far more profitable. That invention did not reduce labour in the fields. It made the hunger for labour worse. There is a bitter joke hidden in that piece of innovation. You start walking toward the rows. The earth underfoot feels packed in some places, loose in others, still damp from night air. Weeds press at the edges. Dew catches on leaves and darkens hems. The sky opens wider as you move away from the cabins. There is no shelter now except the distance itself, and distance is not much of a shelter. The field receives you with indifference. The first touch of cotton leaves on your hands is cool, almost pleasant. That will not last. Soon the plants brush your wrists, your forearms, your sides. Fine bits cling to your sleeves. Burrs catch at fabric. The sack, if the picking season is on, drags behind or against you with its own stubborn weight. Rough against the shoulder or neck, even before it grows heavy, you feel its promise. A thing can be empty and burdensome at the same time. Plantation life understood that principle very well. You bend to the work. The posture itself tells a story. Reaching, pulling, gathering, moving on. Repeat. There is rhythm, but it's not the kind a person chooses for dance. It is imposed rhythm, built from necessity and surveillance. Hands become the centre of your world. Fingers learn speed. Palms learn abrasion. Nails catch dirt. The body narrows its attention because a whole day is too large to hold at once. So you take it one handful at a time. The sun rises higher and the field changes character. Grey becomes gold. Moisture lifts. Smells sharpen. Warm dirt begins to release that deep mineral scent, rich and dry together. Crushed leaves give off a faint green bitterness. Sweat appears first as a light film, then as a constant companion, tracking down the back, collecting at the collar, slipping along the temples. The day settles on your shoulders with intent. Birdsong continues for a while, sounding almost indecently cheerful. A mockingbird tries out several tunes as if auditioning for the role of most unbothered creature in Georgia. You might almost admire the performance. Around you, though, human sound stays functional. The rustle of plants, the scrape of shoes, the drag of sacks, a cough, a murmur. Sometimes a low line of song begins, not bright, not theatrical, but steady enough to hold the mind together. Work songs can keep timing, ease loneliness, carry memory, or quietly say things that plain speech cannot. Some planters wrote smugly about singing in the fields as if it proved contentment. That was convenient nonsense. Song under oppression does not erase oppression. It proves that people remained people despite it. There is a difference, and a very large one. You notice how quickly the body starts bargaining with itself. Perhaps the next few rows will go faster. Perhaps a cloud will cover the sun. Perhaps the shoulder will stop aching if you adjust the sack. Perhaps breakfast will feel less far away in memory if you do not think about it. Little negotiations fill the mind because large ones are impossible. You cannot bargain with the field. The field always wants more. A quirky detail from plantation records and travellers' observations slips into view here. Some cotton fields were haunted, at least in local telling, by stories of lights, cries, warnings, or strange sounds after dark. Whether these tales grew from spiritual belief, fear, exhaustion, or attempts to keep people from moving at night, they became part of the landscape's personality. In daylight, under the ordinary misery of labour, such stories may seem distant. Still, places of suffering gather legends the way fences gather vines. By full morning, your hands have found a pace whether you wished for one or not. The motion becomes familiar, though never easy. Cotton catches at the fingertips, stems brush the knuckles, tiny irritations accumulate. Nothing dramatic. That is the cunning part. Hardship here is often granular. It arrives in scratches, heat, thirst, monotony, hunger, stiffness, and the knowledge that the day is still young. No single discomfort needs to be spectacular when there are so many of them lined up in perfect cooperation. You glance up now and then. The rows keep going. From one angle they seem orderly, from another oppressive in their repetition. The horizon itself starts to feel occupied by labour. Trees mark the distant edges of property. Fences mark the nearer ones. Ownership is everywhere, in wood, in earth, in law, in force. Even the road beyond seems to belong to someone else's freedom. There is a cruel arithmetic at work beneath the calm face of the morning. Cotton prices, acreage, yield per acre, pounds gathered, labour assigned, bodies counted, bodies valued, bodies punished. The language of trade hovers invisibly over the leaves. A bale of cotton is never just a bale here. It is hours of human life compressed and wrapped. It is pain measured in market terms. It is profit with the dirt brushed off, and yet the morning is not made only of labour's demands. Human presence keeps breaking through the system's design. Someone shares a brief joke under the breath. Someone steadies another person's sack. Someone glances toward the sky, reading weather with old skill. Someone hums a tune learned from a mother or grandmother. That persistence matters. Even in a place built to strip identity, personality survives in posture, cadence, expression, and wit. It survives stubbornly, sometimes quietly, sometimes with style. Historians still argue about the precise balance between African continuities and new American forms in the daily culture of enslaved communities in 1830, especially in music, storytelling, and spiritual practice. The evidence is rich in some places and painfully thin in others. But the field itself offers clues: rhythm, call and response, shared movement, memory carried in sound. Nothing written on paper can fully capture what lived in voice. The sun keeps climbing. Shadows shorten. The soft beauty of dawn is gone now, replaced by clarity. You see the texture of the leaves, the pale burst of opened bowls, the brown dryness at the edges of some plants, the insects working their own indifferent shifts. You feel the weave of your clothing against damp skin. Dust settles on ankles. The world is fully awake, and that is not always a comfort. By this hour, you understand something the landscape teaches without words. Life in the cotton fields of 1830 is not a single dramatic scene. It is a sequence of demands beginning before sunrise, each one ordinary enough to seem survivable, all of them together forming a world designed to consume strength. The rows are not merely long, they are patient. They wait for hands, backs, feet, breath. They wait every morning, and in the pale early hours, while mist thins and heat gathers and the day's first labour settles into muscle and bone, you step fully into that truth. surrounded by white fibre, red earth, and a silence beneath the sounds that feels as wide as the field itself. Once the field has taken you in, it begins teaching its rules without any kindness at all. You do not receive a neat speech. No one gathers everyone under a shady tree and explains the philosophy of suffering. The lesson comes through repetition, bend, reach, pull, clear the fingers, shift the sack, step forward, do it again, then enough times that your body starts performing the motions before your thoughts can object. The line of workers forms its own uneasy shape across the rows. Some move slightly ahead, some behind, but nobody is really free to choose a personal tempo for long. You feel the pressure of collective motion. It is there in the corner of your eye, in the rustle from neighbouring plants, in the simple fact that stopping stands out. Plantation labour often depended on gang organisation, with groups made to work together under direct supervision. In theory, it looked efficient. In practice, it meant your pace was never only your own. That is one of the cruel tricks of the field. Even silence has rhythm here. You hear hands moving through dry leaves. You hear sacks drag, scrape, and bump. You hear a low voice calling out something practical, perhaps a warning about a missed bowl or a muttered complaint too soft to become open trouble. There may be birds in the distance, but human effort dominates the sound now. It creates a steady brushing music, not graceful, not random, only relentless. Your fingers start to lose their early morning sensitivity. At first, every burr seems sharp, every scrape distinct. Later the hand becomes blunter, more functional, almost separate from the rest of you. You use thumb and forefinger with speed, teasing cotton from the burr while trying not to tear your skin more than necessary. The fibre feels dry and strangely warm once the sun has touched it. Some locks come free easily, others cling and resist. The plant has no interest in helping. The sack grows heavier by degrees so small they almost hide themselves. That is how many burdens work. The cloth rubs against your shoulder and side. The rope or strap presses where the body is already tired. You shift it, then shift it again, each adjustment offering a small improvement that lasts about as long as a polite smile. Soon enough the drag returns. The sack seems to develop opinions. None of them favour you. A supervisor's presence does not need to be constant to feel constant. Sometimes he's close enough to hear clearly. Sometimes only the possibility of him lingers, moving somewhere along the edge of the field on foot or horseback. You sense inspection before you see it. Backs straighten a little, hands quicken, conversation thins. The entire labour system rests on watching and being watched, on measuring work and reminding workers that measurement exists. There is counting in all of this. Always counting. Row length, field width, time passed, baskets filled, pounds gathered, hands assigned, tasks completed. Cotton culture in the South was full of numeric thinking, though it dressed itself in pastoral language whenever outsiders were listening. Planters like to call plantations orderly worlds. Orderly for whom, you might ask. The cotton plants certainly did not draft the ledgers. Some plantations used a task system in certain kinds of labour, especially in places where rice dominated, but cotton areas more often relied on gang labour and continuous supervision. Historians debate how fixed those categories really were in daily practice, because local custom, crop needs, and planter personality changed the details. What remains unmistakable is the core structure. Work was coerced, monitored, and tied to output in ways that narrowed every hour. The morning warmth deepens into heat that sits directly on your neck. Sweat now comes faster than thought. It gathers under sleeves, at the waistband, behind the knees. Dust clings to it, making a faint grit over the skin. You can feel your own salt drying and returning in cycles. Clothing begins to pull and stick in awkward places. The field smells stronger too. Sun-warmed greenery, trampled stems, dry earth, and the faint oily scent of your own labour mixed together into something heavy and familiar. You become aware of how much of work is actually posture. The back bends, the shoulders round, the knees flex, lock, flex again. The neck angles down until the world narrows to plants and dirt in the next few feet ahead. Every few minutes you straighten a little, not from choice so much as necessity, and the spine sends up a small bright complaint. Then down again. The rows do not care about your bones. Nearby, someone starts a song in a low, even voice. It is not cheerful in the childish sense, but it carries a pulse that the body can follow. A second voice joins, then another. Perhaps only a phrase repeats. Perhaps the words slide between sacred meaning, practical timing, and private feeling. Work songs could guide motion, sharpen solidarity, and relieve the strange loneliness of labour done shoulder to shoulder. Outsiders often heard only melody. They missed the intelligence inside it. There is humour too, because human beings are absurdly committed to producing humour in the least humorous settings. A whispered remark travels one row over. A face changes expression for half a second. Someone imitates the pompous seat of a rider on horseback with a tiny movement of the shoulders while keeping hands at work. It is dangerous to laugh too openly, but laughter has never waited for ideal conditions. It slips through cracks. It survives on scraps. You also learn that the field has a social geography. Certain workers know who is strong, who is injured, who can be trusted with a quiet word, who has a sharp tongue, who carries grief, who notices everything, who helps when help can be given without drawing trouble. Nothing is formally introduced, yet the knowledge exists. Communities under pressure become highly observant. You must. Carelessness is expensive. At some point in the labour, your mind tries to wander beyond the rows. It reaches toward memory, toward scraps of family talk, toward songs from evenings, toward ideas of movement and escape and rest. Then the plant catches your skin, or the sack snags, or a voice calls out, and you return to the present in the least poetic way imaginable. Cotton is excellent at interrupting thought. Perhaps that is one reason the system liked it. A busy body leaves less room for rebellion, at least in theory. In theory, there is that phrase again, because the truth is that thought persists, plans persist, anger persists, prayer persists, weariness persists too, and sometimes weariness is its own argument against the claims of owners who wrote as if hard labour made everyone orderly and loyal. The field does not create loyalty. It creates exhaustion, resentment, skill, endurance, and 1,000 observations nobody bothered to ask for. A less expected fact appears in the details of the plants themselves. Cotton growing required different kinds of labour through the year. Not only picking, there was clearing, ploughing, planting, hoeing, thinning, worming, and tending the rows before harvest. That means life in the cotton fields was not one endless picture of fluffy white bowls, however much later imagery tried to freeze it that way. Much of the year was green, muddy, dusty, and physically punishing in altogether different flavours. White cotton simply made the suffering photograph better, had photography arrived for it. The sun climbs. Insects become more confident. Flies test your patience with democratic enthusiasm, landing wherever sweat gives them hope. Gnats drift in little clouds that seem almost decorative until they insist on your eyes and nose. Grasshoppers fling themselves aside from the path of your feet with offended little clicks. The field is busy with non-human life, none of it useful enough to offset the labour. A dragonfly may flash blue for an instant. Even beauty here refuses to stay still. By mid-morning, the line has settled into something grimly efficient. You can tell without looking that a sack has been dropped for emptying by the change in drag and rustle. You can hear the slight difference between quick-practiced picking and slower, uncertain hands. Children old enough to work may be nearby doing lighter tasks or learning through imitation, though childhood in plantation life is not protected in any modern sense. The field notices when small hands can be made useful. That fact alone chills the air even under the heat. Some workers carry scars, visible when sleeves shift or necklines pull. Others carry injuries that never show at all except in the way they favour one side. Pause briefly after straightening, or breathe a little differently on hot days. Pain becomes part of the labour force. It enters the row with everyone else. There is no ceremony for it, no special seat, no applause for attendance under difficult conditions. The plants remain unmoved. You begin to understand another discipline of the place, which is the management of energy. Nobody can spend everything at once because the day is too long, so the body learns economy. Hands move with minimal flourish, steps shortened. Water, when available, is approached with both need and caution, because a moment spent drinking can become a moment measured by another set of eyes. Even emotion is rationed. Open frustration uses strength. Strength must be saved for the next row. Yet now and then you catch small gestures of care that interrupt the system's logic. Someone shakes a pebble from another person's shoe with a quick crouch and rise. Someone quietly points out a missed cluster, so a neighbour is not embarrassed later at weighing time. Someone hums near a child whose face has tightened with fatigue. None of this appears in plantation account books. Still, without such acts, the human world would collapse into the owner's arithmetic completely. It does not. There is scholarly uncertainty around how much autonomy field hands could exercise in setting micro-rhythms within the gang, because testimony differs and surviving records are uneven. Some evidence suggests experienced workers developed subtle methods for pacing themselves together, shaping a communal cadence under the eye of supervision. Other accounts emphasize harsher interruption and less room for informal control. Both possibilities may be true in different places. Oppression is not identical everywhere, though it shares a family resemblance. When a basket or sack is emptied, there is a brief shift in sensation that almost feels like freedom. The shoulder lifts, the neck loosens, the body remembers what lightness was. For a few moments you move more easily, and then the collecting begins again. Cotton accumulates. So does fatigue. The cycle is simple enough for a child to understand, which is perhaps why the system liked simple cycles. They require less imagination from those in charge. Every now and then someone in authority issues a command with that peculiar tone people use when they want obedience to sound natural. Move along, faster there, mind the row, keep up. Such phrases float over the field like little strips of barbed wire. Not dramatic, just enough to catch on. The work does not need constant shouting to remain coercive. Quiet control can be very effective, especially when backed by force everyone knows is real. You notice thirst more sharply as the sun thickens. The mouth grows tacky. Dust gathers at the back of the throat. Even swallowing feels warm. A sip of water, if it comes, tastes faintly of wood, metal, or whatever vessel carried it. The liquid is never luxurious, only necessary. Still, cool water on a hot field can feel almost holy. Almost. A curious fringe detail from travellers' descriptions lingers here. Some visitors to southern plantations remarked on the astonishing neatness with which certain experienced pickers could strip a plant, leaving little behind. They wrote about it with the detached admiration one might give to a machine or a prize horse. That detached admiration tells you more about the observer than the labour. Skill under coercion is still coercion. Precision does not cancel the cruelty that demanded it. Clouds drift over from time to time, and the shadow of one sliding across the field can alter the whole mood for half a minute. Heat softens, colours dull, breath feels easier. The workers do not stop, but a hidden part of everyone seems to lean upward for that brief mercy. Then the cloud passes. Sun returns with professional seriousness. By now the rhythm has entered your muscles so deeply that you could mistake it for something natural if you were not careful. That is another danger of repetition. It can make the unnatural feel inevitable, but there is nothing inevitable about this arrangement of land, labour and power. It was built, it was enforced, it was defended in speeches, laws, and ledgers by people who benefited from it. The row in front of you is agricultural. The system around it is political. As the work continues, you sense how the field tries to reduce every person to motion and output, while the people within it keep producing evidence of inner life. A songline altered for wit, a glance filled with warning, a hand moving faster not from obedience but from determination to spare trouble later, a whispered prayer, a stubborn upright posture after straightening. These are small things, perhaps. Yet the field is made of small things. So is resistance. The hours do not rush, they thicken. Each minute arrives wearing the same clothes as the last. The line keeps moving. The sacks swell and empty. Leaves rasp against fabric. Shoulders burn. Somewhere a supervisor counts, estimates, judges. Somewhere else a mind drifts toward home, toward kin, toward impossible wishes, toward tomorrow's identical demand. This is the rhythm of forced labour in the cotton fields of 1830. Not a single dramatic crack of misery, but a disciplined sequence of motion, observation, strain, and endurance, repeated until the body obeys the day even while the spirit searches for quieter ways to remain its own. By the time the sun has fully taken command of the sky, the field stops pretending to be anything but a place of punishment. Morning coolness has burned away. The air now feels thick enough to press against your face. Light settles on every leaf and every shoulder with a kind of stubborn confidence, as if the day has decided it will be noticed. And it will. Your skin notices first. Heat in a cotton field is not only temperature, it is a full-body condition. It gathers at the top of your head and slides downward. It pools beneath your clothes. It turns fabric into a second, less friendly skin. Your shirt clings between the shoulders. Your sleeves drag at the elbows. Waistbands become little borders of discomfort. Even your shoes feel warmer, as if the ground has begun slowly cooking them from below. Very considerate of the earth. Always thinking of new ways to contribute. The sun also changes the smell of the place. What had been damp and green earlier now grows sharper and drier. Dust rises with every step and hangs briefly in the bright air before settling on ankles, hems, and the edges of the plants. Crushed leaves release a bitter scent. Warm soil gives off that baked mineral smell that seems part clay, part root, part old weather. Sweat adds its own salt to everything. The result is an atmosphere you do not merely breathe. You wear it. Your hands keep moving, though they are no longer fresh hands. They have entered the blunt middle stage of labour, where soreness has not disappeared but merged into function. The cotton comes away in uneven tufts. Some bowls open kindly. Others defend themselves with dry pointed burrs that catch the fingers and scrape the backs of the knuckles. You feel tiny stings, then larger ones, then only a general roughness that seems to settle into the skin itself. Cotton is sold later as something soft and clean. The plant offering it is dry, prickly, and full of little insults. The burrs deserve their own introduction, really. They are not dramatic enough for legend, yet they are persistent enough to shape your whole day. They catch at nails. They scratch wrists. They snag fabric. They leave behind small cuts that gather dust and salt and become more noticeable each hour. It is this sort of detail that often disappears from grand history. People remember prices, exports, and inventions. Meanwhile, the field is over here teaching your fingers humility one burr at a time. You shift your sack and feel the strap press into a sore place. The shoulder beneath it has become tender, then numb, then somehow both at once. Every few steps the load drags differently depending on the row, the weeds, and the looseness of the soil. A root catches it, a stem tugs at it. The sack brushes the backs of your legs with a rough whisper. The body starts making private calculations. How far to the end of this row? How much weight already gathered? Whether standing straight for one breath will cost you too much time. This is where the field begins narrowing your world with real skill. The larger plantation disappears from thought. The political order vanishes for a while. Even memory dims. Heat has a way of reducing philosophy to immediate needs. Shade, water, a less painful angle for the wrist, air that moves, a moment without the sun pressing directly into your eyes. Your life becomes local to a handful of plants and the strip of ground beneath your feet. Still, the senses refuse to shut down entirely. You hear insects louder now. Cicadas rasp in nearby trees with that strange mechanical insistence that sounds almost like the landscape vibrating. Flies circle, land, leave, and return with the persistence of tax collectors. Bees or wasps may move among blooms and weeds farther out. Grass rustles with lizards or mice slipping away unseen. The field is busy around you, full of motion at scales large and tiny. None of it slows for human misery. The touch of the plants changes through the day as well. Leaves that felt cool at dawn now feel warm and papery in the sun. Stems tap and scrape against your forearms. The cotton fibre itself, once dry and light, begins sticking slightly to damp fingers. Loose bits cling to your sleeves and chest. By noon you might look dusted in fragments of the very crop you are gathering, as though the field is trying to label you as one of its tools. Historians agree that cotton cultivation demanded punishing labour well beyond the famous image of picking alone. Hoeing, clearing and planting, thinning, and removing pests all wore down the body in different ways. Yet picking season developed a particular reputation because it joined repetitive handwork, heavy carrying, intense supervision, and the pressure of harvest timing. Once the bowls opened, delay threatened profit, and when profit felt threatened, mercy did not suddenly bloom among slaveholders. Quite the opposite. You begin noticing the special misery of tiny wounds. A deep injury can command the mind all at once. Small cuts are cleverer. They arrive in numbers. A split near the thumb, a scratch across one knuckle, a prick at the wrist, a rubbed patch beneath the strap. Together they form a kind of invisible map over the body, each point modest by itself, all of them conspiring. When sweat runs into them, the sting comes alive again. The field has a talent for renewing its own arguments. The heat also changes how voices sound. People speak less, and when they do, the words seem to fall shorter, flatter, as if speech itself has weight. A brief warning, a name spoken quietly, a muttered complaint. Somewhere a low song may continue, but even music grows slower under this sun. Breathing becomes part of the rhythm. You hear it around you, sometimes steady, sometimes ragged, sometimes hidden beneath work, sometimes impossible to hide. Water matters now in a new way. Thirst is no longer a mild companion, but a full presence. The mouth dries quickly. Dust settles at the back of the throat. Lips begin to crack if the day is cruel enough, and the day often feels professionally committed to cruelty. A drink, when it comes, can taste faintly of wood, iron, or the stale coolness of a container carried too long in the heat. Yet that first swallow still feels precious. It slides through the body like a promise briefly kept. A scholarly uncertainty remains around exactly how much water access varied between plantations during field labour, because the records most often preserved the planter's version of events, and planter memory had a habit of flattering itself. Some testimonies suggest tightly controlled breaks. Others imply looser practice depending on distance from water sources, season, and the habits of overseers. What no serious historian disputes is that dehydration, heat stress, and exhaustion were ordinary realities in southern agricultural labour. The body was expected to endure what should never have been routine. Your feet begin to register their own complaints. Dust works into shoes or wraps. Socks, if present, shift and rub. Soles meet uneven dirt, roots, hard patches, and loose places that slide under weight. Toes press forward on slight inclines, then brace on flatter ground. Standing, bending, carrying, and stepping do their patient work on ankles and arches. By the hottest part of the day, every part below the knee seems to have developed a private opinion on injustice. Then there is the sun on the back of the neck. It deserves a separate line in the indictment. It burns there steadily, not always enough to blister at once, but enough to make the skin feel stretched and overexposed. A head covering helps if available, though it traps heat of its own. Shade exists mostly in imagination unless the row runs near a tree line, and trees in plantations were rarely planted for the comfort of field hands. Strange oversight! One assumes the owners were simply too distracted by profits to notice that human beings enjoy not roasting. The visual world changes under the noon glare. Colours flatten. The sky turns hard and bright. Leaves lose some of their softness and become sharper at the edges. White cotton seems to flash against the green and brown, forcing the eyes to narrow again and again. Long looking becomes tiring. You find yourself focusing on small areas at a time. One cluster, one branch, one strip of earth. It is easier that way. The whole field at noon is too much to hold. One curious detail from surviving descriptions is how often insects and weather shaped the actual pace of cotton life. Worms, beetles, drought, heavy rain, and early frost could all alter a season's labour and a planter's mood. Travellers and planters sometimes wrote at length about pests devouring plants or storms flattening hopes. Rarely did they pause equally long over the people whose bodies absorbed the consequences of those disruptions. Crop risk was discussed like economics. Human suffering was treated like maintenance. You notice cloth on your body as a constant texture. Coarse weave at the collar, damp folds at the elbow, rough seams pressing the waist or shoulder. Clothing issued to enslaved workers was often basic, durable in the most limited sense, and uncomfortable through long use. It could be patched repeatedly, handed down, worn thin, and repaired again. Against skin already heated and salted, even a seam begins to feel like a sentence. At times, a faint breeze moves across the rows. It hardly deserves the name, but you take it anyway. For a few breaths, the air shifts against sweat-damp skin and the body remembers relief. Leaves tremble. Dust lifts and drifts aside. Someone nearby raises the chin a fraction, as though listening with the neck. Then the breeze passes and the heat folds over you again. Hope in the field often arrives in small quantities. You see others handling the same conditions in their own ways. One person covers the hands as much as possible. Another works with an economy that wastes nothing. Someone straightens rarely, saving movement. Someone else takes tiny moments to stretch the fingers before returning to the bowls. There is expertise here, learned under pressure and passed along through observation more than instruction. Plantation records loved totals, but totals cannot explain the intelligence involved in surviving a labour system designed to grind skill and suffering together. The body begins doing strange things in deep heat. Thoughts come slower, then rush oddly. Sounds seem farther away for a moment, then suddenly close. Light pulses off the leaves. A dull headache may settle behind the eyes. The stomach shifts between emptiness and heaviness, depending on food, water, and fatigue. Time itself becomes less trustworthy. Minutes stretch, then vanish. The field is still the same field, yet under noon sun it feels slightly unreal, as if everything sharpens and blurs at once. Some people carried small practical knowledge that made the worst of the heat marginally more bearable. Wrapping cloth a certain way, wetting a piece of fabric if water could be spared, moving with a steadier rhythm instead of frantic bursts, seeking a brief angle of shadow from a wagon, basket, or tree when chance allowed it. None of this solved the central injustice. It simply made endurance possible for another hour. Survival often depends on modest techniques that history forgets because they are not dramatic enough for monuments. There is also the raw irritation of dust. It settles on sweat and becomes paste on the skin. It gets into the nose, the corners of the eyes, the throat. It lies across the tops of shoes and works into fabric. When a gust lifts it from the row, you feel it touch the face like warm flour. By afternoon, the body can seem coated in the field itself, as if earth, salt, lint, and labour have merged into one outer layer. A more unusual tidbit survives in some accounts of southern rural life. People sometimes used grease, ash, or improvised coverings for skin and insect trouble, depending on need and what could be found. Such measures were rarely elegant, and probably never glamorous enough for polite plantation memoirs. But necessity has very little interest in glamour. Necessity wants results, preferably immediate ones. What becomes clear in these hottest hours is that the field does not wound through spectacle alone. It wounds through conditions, through exposure, through friction, through the endless contact between vulnerable human skin and an agricultural world organized for extraction. The cotton plant is not evil in itself. It is a crop, but placed inside slavery's machinery, every ordinary feature of it becomes part of a larger assault. Sun, burr, dust, thirst, cloth, load, repetition. Each one joins the work, and still, even here, people remain more than labouring bodies. A glance can hold concern. A quiet word can steady someone near collapse. A tune can move through the rows like a cool thread, not removing the heat, but making it less lonely. A person can still choose dignity in posture, wit in murmured speech, care in a shared drink or warning. That may sound small beside the size of the system, Yet the system itself depended on reducing human beings to mere capacity. Every act that proved otherwise mattered. So the hottest part of the day unfolds in layers of sensation, burning light above, dust at the ankles, burrs at the fingers, cloth against damp skin, the smell of earth and sweat, the rasp of insects, the ache in shoulders and wrists, the small, fierce need for water, the quiet adjustments by which a body tries to last. This is what heat, dust, and cotton burrs actually mean in 1830. Not a picturesque southern afternoon, but a relentless physical world pressing on every nerve, every breath, every inch of skin, while the white fibre keeps gathering in the sack as though comfort had never been part of the bargain. As the work continues, another truth begins to reveal itself, one that does not live in the heat or the burrs, but in the meaning forced onto every handful of cotton. The plants in front of you are not here simply because the soil likes them. They are here because the world beyond the field wants what they produce, and wants it badly. The white fibre in your hands is already being imagined as cloth, money, credit, status, and trade by people far from this row. You stand in the place where that chain begins with the body. A cotton field in 1830 is not merely a farm. It is part of a business structure that reaches into counting houses, ports, banks, warehouses, mills, and political chambers. The labour may feel local, painfully local, but the purpose is broad. Cotton travels. Wealth travels with it. Ownership speaks in a calm voice and pretends this arrangement is natural, as though land simply ripened into profit on its own. It does not. Profit has to be pulled out by human hands, weighed, packed, guarded, and sold. That is why the rows are so carefully measured. That is why supervision sits so heavily over the field. Every bowl represents value to someone who thinks in ledgers. A planter looks at acres and sees possible bales. A factor in a city office looks at bales and sees prices. A banker sees credit. A mill owner sees raw material. A merchant sees fabric and sales. By the time cotton reaches a finished shirt or sheet, the person who picked it has been pushed almost entirely out of the story. That erasure is one of the system's proudest accomplishments. Yet here, where the fibre first leaves the plant, the hidden economics become easier to sense. You can feel them in the pressure to keep moving, in the weighing of what you gather, in the difference between a fast hand and a slow one, in the anxiety that hangs over harvest time. Cotton prices might rise or fall in distant markets, but that uncertainty does not soften plantation discipline. It often sharpens it. Owners who feared loss rarely responded by becoming thoughtful philosophers of human welfare. The scale of this business is enormous by 1830. Cotton has become the leading export of the United States, and the expansion of short staple cotton across the Deep South has transformed land, labour, and finance. The invention of the cotton gin made cleaning cotton more efficient, which encouraged more planting, more land seizure, and a greater demand for enslaved labour. Efficiency in one corner of the process did not reduce exploitation, it spread it wider. Innovation can be very selective in whom it helps. You might not know the exact language of export statistics while standing in the field, but you would know the practical result. More cotton means more pressure. More pressure means more land cleared, more rows opened, more labour demanded, more bodies bought and sold into the regions where cotton is booming. The plant creates a horizon of white, but behind that horizon lies a market hungry enough to reorganize lives around it. The plantation yard contains clues to this economy if you know how to read them. The gin house, where cotton is processed, the press that compresses loose fibre into bales, storage spaces, wagons, draft animals, tools kept ready. These are not just agricultural accessories. They are parts of an extraction system. Each structure serves the movement of value away from the people who do the hardest work. The field is the beginning, not the whole. The owner, whether present daily or not, lives inside this arrangement differently from you. He experiences the crop through expectation, risk, and calculation. You experience it through sweat, abrasion, fatigue, and coercion. Both lives are tied to cotton, but the cotton does not treat you equally. One person watches the market, the other bends in the dirt, one debates shipping schedules, the other carries the sack, one worries that prices may disappoint, The other worries about surviving the day without punishment. That is not a shared enterprise. That is a hierarchy written in labour. Even the language surrounding cotton helps hide what it really is. People speak of crops, yield, production, prosperity, and growth. Pleasant words, smooth words, the kind that sit well in speeches. They rarely say that every increase in production required the intensified control of human beings whose choices had been stolen from them. Numbers have a great talent for cleaning up violence. Put enough suffering into a ledger, and it starts looking respectable. There is also the strange theatrical performance of planter gentility. Some slaveholders like to imagine themselves as paternal guardians, civilized stewards, benevolent country gentlemen presiding over orderly estates. It is a fantasy supported by polished furniture, large porches, and very selective memory. The field offers a harsher review. If gentility depends on coercion, punishment, family separation, and forced labour, then it is just brutality wearing polished boots. A quirky detail from the era helps show the contradiction. Certain planters spent heavily on fine imported goods, elegant tableware, stylish clothes, books, or decorative objects from Europe, all while squeezing labour and basic provisions as tightly as possible on their plantations. The same cotton economy that denied comfort to those who produced it could furnish parlours with silver and fill wardrobes with refined fabrics. The irony is almost too neat. The field grows discomfort so that someone else's drawing room can feel tasteful. Credit plays a hidden but crucial role in all this. Cotton is not only sold after harvest, future crops can be promised in advance. Land, enslaved people, equipment, and expected output all become entangled in debt and borrowing. A planter may appear wealthy while also being deeply tied to loans and market hopes. That financial pressure often trickles downward as harsher demands in the field. When money tightens, coercion usually loosens nowhere. Historians still argue about exactly how stable planter wealth was from place to place, because fortunes varied by soil, weather, debt, connections, and timing. Some owners were genuinely rich, others were balancing their image on top of alarming liabilities, but from the perspective of the field, such differences could matter very little. Whether a planter was secure or overextended, the labouring body still met the same rouse, the same watchfulness, the same extraction of effort into someone else's account. The domestic slave trade shadows this whole world. As cotton expanded into Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and beyond, enslaved people were sold south and west in great numbers from older slaveholding regions. Families were broken by sale. Communities were cut apart and redistributed along the path of cotton growth. When you look at a field in 1830, you're often also looking at the aftermath of forced migration. The rows contain grief from many places. That grief has an economic explanation only in the coldest sense. People were treated as assets, collateral, labour units, and saleable property under American law. A strong field hand could be valued for market purposes. A child could be counted in terms of future labour. A woman could be assessed not only for present work but for childbearing within slavery's logic. Such calculations are obscene, but they were routine. The cotton economy made obscenity look administrative. You can see its logic in the weighing process. Cotton must be measured because value must be counted. Once gathered, the fibre goes from being a loose burden in your sack to a quantified product. Weight becomes judgment. Judgment becomes record. Record becomes money. Those few steps transform human effort into market language. The worker's aches do not enter the figures, nor the heat, nor the scratched hands, nor the child left crying in a cabin when the line moved out at dawn. The ledger is tidy because it excludes so much. Another cruelty lies in how ownership claims both the crop and the time used to grow it. Your daylight hours are not treated as yours. Your strength is not treated as yours. Your skill is not treated as yours. Even improvement in speed or technique benefits someone else first. That is one reason slavery was so lucrative in cotton. It captured labour, skill, and time together. A person could become more efficient and still never move closer to freedom through that efficiency. The reward was extraction itself. The wider world admired the result. Cotton-fed textile mills in Britain and the northern United States, helping fuel industrial growth. Factory towns hummed with machinery. Merchants celebrated shipments. Consumers bought cheaper cotton cloth. People spoke of progress. Meanwhile, the raw material for that progress came from fields like this one, where the pace of work was set by coercion and the profits were built from unfree labour. Progress is a lovely word until you ask who was required to bleed for it. There is scholarly debate over how fully ordinary consumers in distant places understood slavery's role in the cotton they purchased. Some knew quite well. Others preferred vague notions of southern agriculture. Still, others looked away because cheap cloth was convenient, and convenience has always had an impressive ability to dull moral curiosity. Whatever they knew or avoided knowing, the connection remained real. The shirt in a shop and the sack in the field belong to the same story. You may notice differences in plantation scale too. Not every operation is a vast estate with grand architecture. Some slaveholders owned fewer enslaved people and worked smaller acreages. Others commanded enormous holdings. Yet size changes only certain details. The structure remains recognizably the same. Land under private control, labour under force, cotton directed toward market exchange, profit drawn upward, hardship pushed downward. A smaller machine can still crush. The daily work, therefore, has a strange double nature. On one level, it is plain physical labour. Pick the fibre, carry the load, repeat. On another level, every motion participates in a huge commercial web. Your bent-back links to ocean shipping. Your scraped hands link to merchant credit. Your sweat links to industrial machinery. This is one reason cotton slavery became so powerful. It joined intimate bodily suffering to global demand. The nearest pain served the farthest customer. There are moments when the economic order reveals itself in plain view. Wagons arriving to move cotton, discussions among white men about prices or shipments, letters carried from town, rumours about market conditions, decisions to plant more acreage next season, purchases made on the strength of an expected crop. In such moments, the field briefly connects to the larger world in visible form. Usually, however, the link is hidden. The body works, the market profits, distance does the rest. A fringe tidbit worth noting is that some cotton planters became almost obsessive amateur experimenters, debating seed varieties, planting methods, soil exhaustion, and yields with great seriousness, as though they were scholars of a noble science. They could discuss agricultural improvement with genuine passion. Yet many showed far less interest in the basic humanity of the people, forced to carry out those improvements. It is possible to be very curious about plants and remarkably incurious about justice. So who owned the harvest legally? The answer in 1830 was brutally simple. The slaveholder owned the land, the crop, and under the law claimed ownership over the labourer as well. But morally, the question becomes explosive. The harvest belonged first to the people whose bodies had coaxed it from the soil under compulsion. The profits belonged to those who controlled the system. Law and justice stood on opposite sides of the row. That conflict sits quietly inside every handful of cotton. The fibre is light, but the meaning is heavy. It carries the weight of stolen labour, stolen time, and stolen claim. It moves outward into traders' wealth, but it begins here as pressure on the hands. The owner may talk about investment and risk. The merchant may talk about quality and transport. The banker may talk about credit. Out in the field, the truth is plainer. Wealth is flowing away from the people who create it, passing from the sack to the scale, from the scale to the bale, from the bale to the ship, while the picker remains in the row, under the sun, surrounded by plants that look almost innocent until you understand what they have been made to mean. When the light finally begins to soften, the field does not become kind, but it does loosen its grip by a fraction. The heat lifts just enough for you to notice the difference. Shadows begin to stretch across the rows. The air, though still warm, no longer feels determined to climb inside your lungs and stay there. Hands keep moving. Backs keep bending. Sacks still drag and fill. Yet somewhere beneath the labour, a new awareness starts to rise. Evening is coming. That knowledge has its own texture. It is not joy exactly. The body is too worn for that. It is closer to a cautious release, the sort that arrives when strain has lasted long enough that any easing feels almost suspicious. You do not trust comfort immediately. The field has trained you too well. Still, as the sun lowers, the colours change. Harsh white light turns amber, leaves darken at the edges. Dust in the air glows briefly before settling back to earth. Even a place of forced labour can look beautiful at the wrong hour. Nature has very poor judgment sometimes. When work in the rows ends, the shift from field to quarters is not a transformation into freedom. It is a movement into another set of demands, yet the body feels the difference at once. Standing upright for longer than a few breaths can make your spine throb with stiff surprise. Shoulders seem oddly light without a sack pulling on them. Fingers keep their curled shape for a while, reluctant to believe the plants are no longer there. You walk back carrying fatigue the way others carry tools. Visibly and everywhere, the path home is its own quiet procession. Feet drag more than they did in the morning. Voices remain low, but for different reasons. People are not preserving fresh strength now. They're managing what little remains. There may be a murmur here and there, a practical remark, a name called "a child found and gathered close." The sounds of the yard return as the cabins come nearer. Chickens scratch in the dirt with offensive levels of confidence. A dog wanders as if it spent the entire day making major decisions. Somewhere a bucket knocks against wood. Somewhere else, a fire is coaxed back to life. The cabins stand close enough to share sound, smoke, and worry. They are usually small, roughly built, and plain. Logs or simple boards form walls that keep out some weather, though not all. Chinks may be filled with clay or other material, but drafts still find a way in when the season turns cold. Roofs can leak. Floors may be hard-packed earth or rough planks. Windows, if present, are limited. Light falls in weakly. Air moves unevenly. Comfort is not the design goal here. Containment is nearer the truth. Inside, the dimness feels immediate after the open field. Your eyes adjust slowly. Firelight or fading daylight catches the outlines of objects that matter because there are so few of them. A bed frame, perhaps, or a pallet, a stool, cooking tools, a gourd, a chest if fortune has allowed one to be made or kept. Fabric hung for privacy, though privacy in such spaces is often more hope than reality. Every item must earn its place. There is little room for ornaments, and even less for waste. The smell of the cabin at evening is different from the smell at dawn. Smoke grows stronger as cooking begins. Cornmeal, beans, greens, or bits of pork, if any are available, send up scents that are plain but deeply welcome. Damp clothing dries slowly on bodies or near fire. Earth from the yard comes in on shoes and hems. Human closeness fills the room with warmth, breath, and the unmistakable evidence of a day spent in labour. It is not the polished fragrance of any romantic old house. It is life compressed into one tight space. Food must still be prepared. That is one of the relentless truths of the evening. Exhaustion does not cancel hunger, and hunger does not prepare supper by itself. Work in the field often gave way to work at the hearth, especially for women who carried a double burden of labour. The fire must be tended where water carried, meals stirred, pots watched, children fed. The transition from one demand to another can be so smooth it hardly feels like a transition at all. Only the setting changes. You sit or crouch, and the body begins reporting the cost of the day in more detail. Fingers are tender, the back tightens in bands. Calves twitch with fatigue. Shoulders burn dully. The neck feels hot where sun met skin for too many hours. Dust clings in a fine layer wherever sweat dried. A basin of water, if it can be spared, becomes a luxury beyond its humble appearance. Washing hands or face in cool water sends a quiet shock through the system. Even wiping away dirt with a damp cloth can feel like recovering part of yourself. Children move through this evening world with a different kind of energy. Some are restless from confinement. Some droop with sleep. Some want food immediately, with the uncompromising conviction that children have always brought to hunger. Some seek the lap or voice of a parent, climbing against tired bodies that still make room for them. That may be the most moving thing in the quarters at dusk. No matter how severe the day has been, tenderness keeps appearing, practical and unsentimental, but unmistakably there. Family life under slavery was always fragile because it existed beneath the threat of sale. punishment, and interference. Yet families still formed, endured, adapted, and loved, with an intensity sharpened by that very danger. A mother smooths a child's hair. A father lifts a small boy who wants to be carried though his own arms ache. A grandmother speaks in a low voice that settles everyone a little. Kinship in the cabins is not a sentimental painting. It is work, memory, reassurance, discipline, and fierce attachment sharing the same narrow room. The cabin walls hold sound in particular ways. A baby fusses. Someone coughs. A spoon or wooden paddle strikes the side of a pot. Laughter rises suddenly from one doorway over, then drops again. Conversation from the next cabin drifts through. Words partly clear, partly blurred. Music may appear in snatches, a hummed line, a rhythmic tap, the soft beginning of a tune too tired to become full song. Evening on a plantation is never entirely private, lives touch at the edges whether people wish it or not. Historians agree that enslaved housing was generally poor by design, though the exact size and construction varied widely by region, wealth, and period. Some owners claimed to provide decent quarters, and a few visitors repeated those claims with embarrassing gullibility. Archaeology, testimony, and plantation records tell a harder story. Crowding, inadequate materials, poor ventilation, smoke, vermin, and limited furnishings were common. A cabin could shelter life without offering ease. There is, however, a peculiar creativity in how people shape harsh spaces into livable ones. A rag becomes a curtain, a crate becomes storage, a peg becomes a place for a treasured garment, herbs may hang drying if available. A corner is assigned to a child. A bit of cloth is folded carefully because it matters. A cracked bowl is still kept because it remains useful. Order inside the cabin can be a form of dignity, a way of saying that the people here are more than what the plantation intended them to be. Supper, when ready, is eaten without ceremony but not without meaning. Cornbread, ash cake, mush, beans, greens, sweet potatoes, or whatever the ration and garden allow can fill the room with a brief sense of focus. Eating at the end of the labour has a seriousness to it. The body receives food almost gratefully, though not always enough of it. Salt, smoke, meal, grease, and bitterness mingle on the tongue. The food is simple. But after the field, even simplicity can feel rich. A scholarly uncertainty remains around the exact extent to which enslaved households could improve their diet through hunting, fishing, gardening, and local exchange, because conditions varied sharply from plantation to plantation. Some evidence shows garden patches, poultry, or supplemental foods helped sustain families. Other cases reveal much tighter restriction and greater deprivation. What remains clear is that people often fought to create extra sources of nourishment because plantation rations alone were frequently insufficient or monotonous. After eating us, the cabin may briefly become a place where personality returns more fully, not because suffering disappears, but because the field no longer sets the tempo. A tired joke lands better indoors. A story can be told with more shape. Someone may mend clothing by fading light. Someone may plait hair, rub aching hands, or inspect a torn hem. Children ask questions. Elders answer selectively, which is one of the oldest and wisest habits in human history. Not every truth belongs to a child's bedtime. There is also religion, or at least reflection that moves in a religious direction, a prayer spoken aloud, a verse remembered, a quiet appeal for safety, for endurance, for justice too large to imagine clearly. The spiritual life of enslaved people in the South drew from African inheritances, Christianity, local practice, and personal experience in varied ways. It was not one fixed thing. In the cabins, belief could be whispered, sung, argued, or held silently in the chest when no overseer could inventory it. One quirky detail from accounts of plantation evenings is how valuable small objects could become. A well-sharpened knife, a cooking pot, a wooden comb, a button, a scrap of ribbon, a pipe, a Bible page, a needle, a cup. In a world of scarcity, the ordinary turns precious quickly. Ownership on this scale is intimate. You know the weight of a spoon because it is yours to use. You know a shawl's softness because you mended it yourself. The smallest possession can carry a strange emotional gravity, yet the quarters are not all comfort and family warmth. They hold strain too. Fatigue can shorten tempers. Hunger can make voices harder. Crowding means irritation has nowhere to go. Grief sits near the fire as readily as affection does. If a loved one has been sold, if illness is moving through the cabins, if punishment was given that day, if rumour is spreading, the room can feel heavy even while supper cooks. Evening does not erase sorrow. It often gives sorrow more room to speak. Nightfall also sharpens the awareness of vulnerability. Once dark settles, the plantation changes character again. The open field disappears into blackness. Tree lines become shapes only partly seen. Sound travels differently. A footstep outside can seem closer than it is. Patrols, surprise inspections, or the simple authority of owners and overseers still exist beyond the cabin walls. The quarters are home in the emotional sense, but not in the legal one. That distinction matters. It is difficult to relax fully in a place where your roof stands on someone else's power. Even so, rest must be taken where it can be found. Bedding is arranged. Children are settled. One last task is finished if possible. Fire is banked. Bodies lower themselves slowly, carefully, because stiffness has set in. The roughness of blanket, pallet, or mattress made from whatever materials are available presses against muscles already overused. Lying down does not remove the aches, it merely spreads them out. Still, horizontal relief is relief. The sounds of the quarters at night are among the most human sounds on the plantation. Murmured conversation fading, a baby finally asleep. Someone snoring almost at once from total exhaustion. Someone else lying awake longer, thinking, planning, remembering, worrying. Crickets fill the outer darkness. The occasional crackle from a fire answers them. A door shifts on its hinge. A night bird calls. The world becomes quieter, but never truly silent. There is an emotional truth in this evening life that plantation records rarely capture. The cabin after sundown is where people reclaim themselves in fragments. Through cooking, care, laughter, prayer, mending, touch, conversation, and simple presence. They rebuild something the field tried all day to wear away. It is never complete. The pressure of slavery enters the doorway with them, but the work of being a family, a couple, a parent, a grandparent, a neighbour, a thinking person, continues nonetheless. So when you imagine the cabins after sundown, you should not picture only misery, and you should never picture comfort untouched by fear. Picture instead a cramped wooden room holding both exhaustion and devotion. Picture smoke in the rafters, children against tired shoulders, coarse cloth being folded, cornmeal supper steaming in dim light, low voices threading through the close air. Picture a place too small for the number of lives it contains, yet large enough for love, grief, humour, prayer, and stubborn dignity to keep breathing there long after the field is let go for the day. The plantation can demand a full day in the field and still expect the body to survive on remarkably little. That is one of its ugliest talents. It asks for strength, speed, balance, patience, resistance to heat, resistance to cold, steady hands, strong backs, and feet that keep moving over rough ground. Then it offers food, clothing, and daily necessities with the generosity of a locked cupboard. You are expected to be useful, not comfortable. There is a difference, and the difference shows up everywhere. Food begins with ration, not choice. On many cotton plantations, the weekly issue for enslaved people centered on cornmeal and pork, sometimes salted, sometimes poor in quality, sometimes both. Other foods might appear depending on region, season, owner, local resources, or what people could raise or obtain for themselves. But the foundation was often simple, heavy, and repetitive. Cornmeal fills the stomach. Salt pork offers fat and some flavour. Neither creates a varied or balanced diet by itself. though the plantation often behaved as if human bodies were powered by indifference. Cornmeal appears in many forms because necessity has imagination. It can become mush, hoe cake, ash cake, pone, or a rough bread cooked in whatever way the evening allows. The smell of it by the fire is plain and warm, one of those scents that does not flatter itself. It says only that something to eat is coming. Salt pork, when available, brings smoke, grease, and the sharp edge of preservation. It can flavour a pot of beans or greens more than it can fill a plate. Sometimes its role is less to nourish than to remind the tongue that richer food exists somewhere else. And yet people do remarkable things with limited ingredients. Greens gathered or grown can add life to a meal. Sweet potatoes offer softness and sweetness when roasted. Peas or beans deepen a pot and make it last. Molasses, if it reaches your hands, changes everything for a moment. The simplest food can feel almost luxurious when labour has hollowed you out. Hunger lowers the threshold of delight very quickly. A warm cake of cornmeal at dusk can seem more generous than a banquet described in a planter's dining room. Owners often like to speak as if issuing rations proved benevolence. The logic is almost too insulting to repeat. They create the deprivation, then congratulate themselves for not allowing starvation to become too obvious. The ration system was not kindness, it was maintenance. A person forced into labour had to be kept barely fed enough to continue producing. The humanity of the eater had very little to do with the calculation. Historians agree that diet among enslaved people varied widely by region and plantation, but nutritional deficiency was a constant risk. Seasonal shortages, poor quality provisions, inadequate quantities, and the sheer energy demands of agricultural labour meant that hunger, or at least chronic undernourishment, was common. Plantation records, when they mention food at all, often flatten that reality into numbers that sound sufficient on paper. Paper, as always, is not asked to hoe a field in July. This is why gardens mattered so much where they were allowed. A small patch near the quarters could transform evening life. Collards, turnips, beans, peas, pumpkins, squash, onions, or whatever the soil and season supported might grow there under the care of hands already exhausted from the day's work. Imagine that for a moment. You labour all day for someone else's crop, then come home and labour again for your own survival. The garden is not leisure, it is recovery by effort. Still, the garden offers something the field does not. It offers a measure of control, seeds placed by your own decision, plants watched because they will feed your household. Soil worked for family, not for the ledger. That difference changes the feeling of the labour. A row of greens behind the cabin may be small, but it carries dignity in every leaf. It says that life is still being shaped from below, even under pressure. Fishing, trapping, gathering nuts, or keeping chickens could also supplement the diet in some places. Much depended on local conditions and on how tightly an owner controlled movement and property. A little fish from a creek, a rabbit caught with skill and luck, berries gathered in season, eggs from a few birds. All these could mean relief from monotony and real improvement in nourishment. A stew with something extra in it is not just tastier. It is proof that the plantation has not monopolized every source of sustenance. A scholarly question still remains around how much supplemental food enslaved communities could regularly secure, because conditions differed sharply and the evidence is uneven. Some testimonies describe gardens, hunting, and local exchange as crucial supports. Others reveal stricter deprivation and fewer opportunities. Both realities existed. What is beyond dispute is that people often had to create their own margin of survival, beyond what the ration system offered. Clothing tells a similar story. It is issued in limited amounts, chosen for cheapness, and expected to last through work that destroys it. Men might receive coarse shirts and trousers. Women might receive simple dresses, shifts, or skirts with little concern for comfort or fit. Children often wore even less, especially in warm weather. Shoes could be scarce, seasonal, ill-fitting, or absent altogether. Cloth might be wool, linen, Osnaburg, or rough cotton. The texture is scratchy, stiff, and practical in the most miserly sense of that word. There is no romance in plantation clothing when you imagine it honestly. Fabric rubs the neck raw. Seams press under the arm. Sleeves catch where the elbow bends. Wet cloth sticks. Dry cloth scratches. Hems tear in brush. Knees wear thin. Buttons disappear. Soles split. A hat, head wrap, or kerchief may help against sun or cold. But these too wear down. The body lives inside textiles that are never really allowed to become personal before they begin failing again. Repair becomes its own necessary art. By firelight, someone threads a needle through worn cloth and mends a tear that the next week may reopen. A patch is laid over a knee, then another patch over the patch. A child's garment is cut down from an older person's worn-out one. A piece of cloth becomes a head covering, a rag, a tie, or a wrap depending on what the day demands. Nothing useful is discarded lightly. In conditions of scarcity, fabric becomes almost a second currency. That is one reason a needle can be so valuable. A needle means continuation. It means a shirt surviving another month, a blanket held together, a hem fixed before it unravels, a baby wrapped more securely. Such a tiny object, so easily lost. Yet in the quarters it can carry the significance of a fine tool in a workshop. Necessities acquire drama when there are so few of them. Some enslaved people found ways to alter or personalize clothing despite the limits. A brighter scrap of fabric, a more careful knot in a head wrap, beads if obtainable, a ribbon saved and reused, a garment cut to sit better on the body. These details matter because they show that dress is never purely functional. Even in severe conditions, people make aesthetic decisions. They claim style where they can. The plantation could issue cloth. It could not fully extinguish taste. One curious detail from the period is that some owners were almost absurdly proud of issuing annual clothing allowances, listing them in records as though they were performing an act of public virtue. A pair of shoes, a blanket, 2 shirts, perhaps a jacket in colder regions, and suddenly the master imagines himself a philanthropist. It takes a rare confidence to underdress people for hard labour and then demand applause. Planter self-satisfaction was, unfortunately, one of the region's more abundant crops. Blankets and bedding reveal the same harsh economy. A blanket may be coarse, thin, patched, or shared. Mattress materials could be corn husks, straw, leaves, or whatever else might serve, packed into ticking if available. They rustle, shift, flatten, and poke in ways no merchant would use in a sales pitch. Cold weather makes all of this more serious. A poor blanket on a winter night is not a quaint inconvenience. It is a long negotiation between discomfort and sleep, soap, candles, cooking vessels, combs, and containers also shape daily life. The absence of any one of them can turn a tired evening into a larger struggle. Soap is cleanliness, but also relief from sweat and grime. Candles mean mending or cooking can continue after dark, if you have them. A pot is the difference between raw meal and supper. A comb is not luxury when hair must be kept with care and dignity. A bucket means water can be carried without improvisation. Necessities look humble until one is missing. This humble world is where ingenuity thrives. A gourd becomes a dipper. Ash may aid in cleaning. Grease can serve several practical purposes. A broken handle gets replaced with carved wood. A cracked vessel is kept in service for one more task. Children learn quickly that things have to be cared for because replacements are uncertain. Adults learn to judge materials by touch, weight, and weakness. What will hold? What will split? What can be saved? Survival sharpens the eye. There is also a social life to necessity. Food is shared, clothing is handed down, a needle is borrowed, a pot is lent. Someone with skill at sewing, mending shoes, or preserving food becomes quietly important to everyone nearby. Mutual reliance grows from material scarcity. People become one another's insurance policy because the plantation will never serve that role honestly. Community is not just emotional here, it is practical infrastructure. Children experience these necessities very directly. A hungry child does not care about abstract economics. A child with sore feet understands the meaning of shoes without reading a single line of theory. A child wearing a garment made from older cloth knows how things continue through family hands. Early lessons in plantation life often arrive through material lack. eat what is given, save what can be saved, mind the good cup, do not lose the needle, keep close to the blanket in winter. These are domestic instructions, but they are also education in survival. Historians still debate the exact degree to which enslaved people could participate in local informal markets by selling produce, crafts, poultry, or other goods, because laws, custom, and planter toleration varied so much. In some places, such exchange allowed families to obtain small necessities or better food. In others, it was more constrained or dangerous. The important point is that whenever a little economic space opened, people often used it with impressive skill. Even tiny margins could matter. What all of this reveals is that bare necessities were never really bare. They carried emotional and social weight. A bowl of peas could mean a better evening for everyone in the cabin. A patched shawl could mean warmth for a grandmother. A pair of shoes could change a child's winter. A hidden bit of sugar or molasses might turn an ordinary meal into a remembered kindness. Comfort, when scarce, becomes vivid. So does deprivation. The cotton economy depended on this imbalance. It extracted huge value from labour while keeping daily support close to the minimum. Bodies had to be sustained, but not too well. Clothes had to cover, but not too comfortably. Food had to fill, but not delight too often. Objects had to function, but replacement could be delayed. The plantation wanted endurance, not ease. Ease might encourage the dangerous idea that labourers were human beings entitled to ordinary care. Heaven forbid. And yet, against that grim design, people still built forms of domestic life from what they had. A pot simmering with greens from the garden. Cornbread divided carefully so everyone receives a piece. A shirt mended by hands that have already worked enough. A blanket tucked around a sleeping child. A comb passing through hair in the evening light. A little shelf holding treasured scraps and tools. These are not grand acts in the public sense. Still, they are the texture of survival. So when you picture food, clothing, and bare necessities in the cotton world of 1830, picture the plainness of the ration, the roughness of issued cloth, the constant need to patch and improvise, the smell of cornmeal near the fire, the scrape of a wooden spoon against an iron pot, the careful folding of garments worn almost to threads. Picture hardship, certainly, but also picture intelligence, adaptation, sharing, and the determined effort to make life livable with too little. The plantation supplied the minimum, human beings supplied the rest. When the day's practical tasks begin to loosen their hold, another life starts to rise in the quarters, quieter than the field but often more powerful. It lives in voice, in rhythm, in shared glances, in the way a sentence can carry more than one meaning at once. The plantation would prefer every person to remain only tired, only obedient, only occupied with the next demand. But human beings are inconveniently rich inside. Even after labour, even under threat, they keep making culture. You hear it first in sound, a low hum from one doorway, a few clapped beats, soft enough not to draw the wrong attention, the steady tap of hand on knee, foot on floor, spoon on wood. Someone begins a line of song and someone else answers. The melody may be plain, or winding, or worn smooth from use. It might be sacred in language, teasing in tone, sorrowful in feeling, or all three in the same breath. Music here is not ornament, it is memory carried aloud. The sound of collective singing in the evening can change the entire atmosphere of the quarters. Smoke still hangs in the rafters. Children still fuss and settle. The body still aches from labour. Yet the room becomes larger when voices join. One person starts. Another takes the phrase and bends it. A third adds a harmony or a rough echo. The walls remain close, but the spirit of the place stretches. You feel how a song can push back against confinement without moving a single board. This music does many kinds of work at once. It can soothe children. It can mark belief. It can carry grief without naming every detail. It can give tired adults a rhythm gentler than the rhythm of forced labour. It can preserve fragments of African musical practice while also shaping something new in the American South. Historians agree that enslaved communities created rich and influential musical traditions though no document can fully capture the tone, breath, and improvisation of voices actually raised together in a cabin after dark. And then there are the stories. Stories arrive when there's just enough energy left to turn the day into language. Some are funny on purpose, some begin as practical talk and become performance. A boast is exaggerated. A foolish planter or overseer is imitated with dangerous accuracy. A stubborn mule acquires the dignity of a politician. A child asks a question and receives an answer that wanders delightfully before it reaches the point. The room listens differently when a gifted teller begins. Humour matters here more than outsiders often understand. Jokes do not erase suffering. They refuse its total control. A whispered laugh at authority, a sideways comment, a sly nickname for someone powerful and ridiculous. These acts trim grandeur down to size. The planter may own land, crops, cabins, and legal power, but if the people in the quarters can still laugh at his vanity, his walk, his voice, his pretensions, then he has not fully conquered the interior world. Ridicule is a small rebellion with excellent manners. Many stories carry animals at their centre. Trickster tales, especially those involving clever rabbits or foxes, survive because they say something essential without needing to explain themselves. A weaker creature survives by wit. A proud, stronger one is fooled by appetite or arrogance. Children enjoy the adventure. Adults hear the deeper current. Intelligence, patience, timing, and indirection become virtues in a world where open defiance can be fatal. The tale entertains, but it also teaches. Scholars still debate the exact pathways through which many of these tales changed over time. Mixing West and Central African elements with new American conditions and neighbouring influences. The records are incomplete, and much of the tradition lived orally rather than in print. But the larger truth is clear enough. Storytelling in enslaved communities was not a pastime separated from reality. It was a way of preserving values, sharing caution, shaping humour, and keeping intellectual life active under oppression. You notice how the body responds to this world of sound differently than it responds to the field. In labour, rhythm is imposed. Here, rhythm is chosen. In the field, repetition narrows you. In song or story, repetition can steady you. A hand tapping time on a knee feels unlike a hand pulling cotton from a burr. The muscles may still ache, but they now serve something of your own. Even a tired voice lifted in chorus can bring back a sense of personhood that the day spent trying to flatten. There are also quieter forms of resistance that do not announce themselves with music. A look that warns another person to be careful. A message passed through ordinary seeming conversation. A promise to share a little food. An agreement to help mend clothing before a cold spell. Knowledge of paths, habits, schedules, places where tools are kept. Times when attention drifts. The quarters hold information. Information becomes power when openly available power is denied. Some acts of resistance are practical and small enough to escape immediate notice. Working a little slower when possible. Protecting an injured person by covering for them. Pretending ignorance when ignorance serves the vulnerable. Misplacing information before it reaches the wrong ears. Feigning cheerfulness while meaning something sharper underneath. The plantation liked dramatic categories such as obedience and rebellion. Real life was subtler. Many people resisted in increments, preserving themselves and one another through tactics too fine for a ledger. There is a certain kind of evening conversation that appears harmless to outside listeners and says much more than it seems. A remark about weather may be really about movement. A question about a relative on another place may carry news. A line from a hymn may console, signal, or warn, depending on who hears it and how. Language under pressure becomes layered. You learn to hear tone as much as words. You learn when not to ask for fuller explanation. A quirky, but revealing detail from accounts of plantation life is how often enslaved people were described by white observers as cheerful when they were in fact being strategically unreadable. A smile could be courtesy, caution, mockery, endurance, or self-protection. A song could be worship, sorrow, timing, or coded communication. Outsiders who insisted on simple interpretation usually interpreted whatever best protected their own conscience. They heard what they needed to hear. The truth remained in the room. Children absorb all of this with astonishing speed. They learn when laughter is safe and when it must stay soft. They learn which adults tell stories best. They memorize refrains before they understand every word. They watch faces. They sense tension. They hear names spoken carefully or avoided entirely. Culture passes to them in fragments, repeated nightly, wrapped in sound and gesture. No schoolhouse is required for this education. The cabin is enough. There may be dancing too, though space is limited and caution often necessary. A shuffle, a step pattern, a turn, hands clap, feet mark time on packed earth or rough boards. The movement might begin with children and be joined by adults who claim they are only watching. The body remembers pleasure even when the day has offered little of it. Motion chosen freely, however brief, has a very different quality from labour. It can be playful, flirtatious, reverent, or teasing. It reminds you that not every movement must serve the crop. Religion often joins this social world rather than standing apart from it. Prayer meetings, spiritual songs, scriptural language, and shared hopes of justice can provide a framework for endurance and quiet defiance. The story of deliverance means something different when your own life is held by force. Biblical language about bondage, wilderness, and promised freedom does not stay abstract for long in such a place. Faith can console, but it can also sharpen moral vision. A person who believes oppression is seen by God is not spiritually conquered, however constrained the body may be. Historians agree that African cultural continuities remained important in the lives of enslaved people, though exactly how they appeared differed by region, generation, and circumstance. Musical forms, spiritual understandings, kinship patterns, naming practices, food ways, healing traditions, and storytelling all bore traces of older worlds reshaped in America. Nothing remained untouched by slavery, but nothing was erased cleanly either. Culture proved more stubborn than the system expected. Healing knowledge is part of this hidden strength. A person known for herbs, poultices, roots, teas, or practical remedies may be quietly valued by everyone around. A headache, a cough, a sore limb, a troubled stomach, a difficult birth. These common sufferings call for skill where formal care is absent or unreliable. Such knowledge can pass between women, between generations, through memory and experiment. The quarters become not only a place of family and song, but a place of expertise. And then there is the simple act of remembering names, places, and kin connections. In a world where sale and separation threaten to scatter people, memory itself becomes a resistance. Who belongs to whom? Who came from which county or state? Who was sold last year? Who has kin on another plantation? Who taught which song? Who carried which story? This web of recollection pushes against the plantation's attempt to reduce people to units of labour. Names restore complexity. Relationships restore humanity. Not every evening is warm or lively. Some nights are too burdened by grief. Some are silenced by fear after punishment. Some are broken by illness. Some are simply too tired for anything beyond eating and lying down. Resistance is not always dramatic, and culture is not always abundant on command. Sometimes survival itself is the evening's whole achievement. That too must be honoured. A person does not fail by being too weary to sing. Yet over time, these repeated acts of expression and mutual care create a world the plantation cannot fully own. Songs accumulate, phrases survive, recipes continue, jokes sharpen, children inherit rhythms, lovers speak softly in corners, elders correct memory where needed, advice is given, warnings are passed, pride takes forms that do not depend on white approval. A person can be denied legal freedom and still participate in a social world full of judgment, beauty, preference, wit, and principle. A fringe tidbit worth noticing is that some enslavers became uneasy when gatherings in the quarters seemed too lively, especially if drumming, dancing, or nighttime meetings suggested a level of unity they could not easily monitor. That unease tells you something important. Oppression fears community. It may tolerate isolated fatigue, but it distrusts shared feeling, a group that can sing together, laugh together, and exchange meanings beyond the master's understanding is already harder to rule than a crowd of silent strangers. There is a tactile quality to all this evening culture as well. The warmth of another shoulder beside yours, the vibration of clapped hands, the thump of feet through the floor, a child leaning heavily against a parent during a story, a hand briefly covering a mouth to hide laughter, the passing of a cup, a bowl, a needle, a bit of cloth. Sound and touch work together. Community is not just heard, it is felt in the body. What emerges most clearly is that songs, stories, and hidden defiance are not side notes to plantation life. They are essential parts of how people remained fully human within a system designed to treat them as property. The field took labour by force. The quarters rebuilt meaning by choice, whenever choice could be found. A spiritual line sung softly, a joke shared in near darkness, a tale of a clever rabbit, a warning folded into ordinary talk, a hand clap setting time for tired feet. All these actions carry more than entertainment. They carry intelligence, memory, solidarity, and refusal. So in the evening hush of the plantation, after pots are scraped and children begin to droop and the smoke turns blue in the dim light, another kind of work begins. It is the work of preserving inner life. You hear it in the hum that becomes harmony, in the laughter pressed low, in the story that teaches without announcing its lesson, in the careful exchange of news, in the dignity of people who still create beauty while denied justice. The songs are soft, the stories are nimble, the defiance is often hidden, but none of it is small. It is how a community keeps its soul from being harvested. Children are never far from the cotton world. Even when the rows are too tall for their small bodies, or the sacks too heavy for their shoulders, the plantation notices them early. It notices their hands, their legs, their ability to carry, fetch, watch, scare birds, mind younger siblings, gather chips for the fire, bring water, or learn the motions that will later be demanded without mercy. Childhood here is not protected space. It is a brief and narrowing corridor. In the yard at first light, a child may still look like a child in any ordinary sense. Bare feet in dust, sleep still clinging to the face, hair needing attention, eyes following older people with that mixture of dependence and sharp observation that belongs to the young. But the plantation does not leave such innocence alone for long. It keeps asking what use can be made of growing bodies. That question hangs over childhood like weather. Very young children often remain near the cabins under the watch of older women. Elderly people, or older children whose own labour has not yet become full field labour. Even this arrangement is not restful in the modern sense. Babies need holding, feeding, soothing. Toddlers wander toward danger with great confidence and very little judgment. Small children cry, quarrel, scrape knees, lose cups, chase chickens, and ask impossible questions at inconvenient moments. Ordinary childhood does not vanish. It simply unfolds under conditions of scarcity, fear, and constant adult fatigue. The sounds of children in the quarters create their own atmosphere. Little feet on rough floors, sudden laughter, a baby wailing with dramatic outrage, a whispered scolding, a lullaby half sung by someone stirring a pot or mending a shirt. The sweetness of these sounds sits beside their vulnerability. Every giggle belongs to a child whose future is being measured by a labour system already waiting for them. That shadow never fully leaves the room. As children grow, their world fills with tasks. At first the jobs may seem small. Carry this, fetch that, watch the baby, bring chips for the fire, pick up dropped cotton, keep the birds out of the garden, hold the gourd, stir the pot, sweep the floor, find the missing spoon. Small tasks do not feel small when repeated daily. They train the hands, they train attention, they teach obedience to necessity, which is not the same thing as obedience to justice. By the age of 6, 7, or 8, some children are already expected to contribute in visible ways. Duties vary by plantation, season, and the whims of those in power, but the larger pattern is plain. A child must become useful as soon as usefulness can be extracted. Scaring crows from fields, carrying water to workers, gathering kindling, Tending younger children or performing small errands teaches the rhythm of labour long before the child fully enters the picking line. The plantation likes apprenticeship when it does not have to pay wages for it. Historians agree that enslaved children were put to work at young ages, though the exact timing and type of tasks varied widely. Some accounts describe children entering more regular field work around age 10 or 12, while others show labour beginning earlier in lighter, but still demanding forms. The evidence differs because conditions differed. The central truth remains the same. Childhood under slavery was shaped by labour from an early age, not sheltered from it. For a child, the field first appears as both place and warning. It is where parents disappear for long hours. It is where older siblings come back dusty, silent, or sore. It is where the sun lives in its harshest form. Yet it also calls with curiosity. Children watch adults move through rows with practice speed. They imitate hand motions in play. They test their own strength by picking a few bowls, carrying a tiny bundle, or dragging a sack far too large and immediately regretting the ambition. Children are always rehearsing the worlds around them, even the cruel ones. There is a special sadness in watching a child learn work not as a path to independence, but as submission to a system that claims them in advance. In many households across the world, children help with chores as part of belonging. Here, belonging is never simple. A mother teaching a daughter to stir meal, mend cloth, or hush a baby is passing on skill and care. The same child may also be moving toward a lifetime of labour she did not choose. Love and tragedy occupy the same lesson. Play survives anyway, because children are stubbornly alive. A stick becomes a horse, a rag becomes a doll, pebbles become counters in a game. A patch of dirt becomes a kingdom briefly governed by rules far more sensible than any plantation law. Children race, tease, invent songs, copy adults, make faces, and laugh at absurd things. They tease the dog, chase one another around the cabin corners, and perform the sort of serious nonsense that adults across history have both adored and tried to stop. Play does not mean life is easy. It means the young mind refuses to be only useful. A quirky detail from plantation accounts and later recollections is how often children made toys from scraps. Cornhusk dolls, carved animals, cloth bundles, little carts, or objects shaped from mud and imagination could fill an evening with delight. These toys were humble, certainly, but they carried enormous power. A toy says that the child is not only labour in training. The child is also a maker of worlds, however small, yet even play teaches caution. Children learn who may be mocked and who must never be mocked where the wrong ears can hear. They learn not to wander too far. They learn which adults are kind, which are stern, which are safe, and which are unpredictable. They learn to quiet quickly when tension enters a room. They learn that the sight of a mounted white man may change the whole air of the yard. Such knowledge is not formal schooling, but it is education of a severe kind. The emotional life of enslaved children must have been full of contradictions. They know affection and fear at once. They experience warmth in family life and instability in the larger system. They may fall asleep to song and wake to shouting. They may be held tenderly by a parent who cannot promise they will remain together next year. They may admire an older brother's skill in the field, while dreading the day they are expected to match it. Childhood here is not one emotion. It is a tangled braid of attachment, uncertainty, curiosity, and premature seriousness. Scholars still argue about how children understood slavery at different ages, because memory, testimony, and observation can only reveal so much. Some children likely recognize danger and injustice very early. Others may have known the rules before fully grasping the structure behind them. Understanding grows in layers. A child first knows that someone has power. Later, the child learns what that power can do. Later still comes the moral recognition that it should never have existed in that form at all. Mothers in particular carried burdens that the plantations scarcely acknowledged. They had to nurture children under the threat of sale, illness, and forced labour, often while meeting work demands of their own. A mother might leave a small child crying in the morning because the field required her body elsewhere. She might come back at dusk and still need to cook, mend, soothe, and instruct. The gentleness of her touch existed beside exhaustion so deep it must sometimes have felt like another body laid over her own. Fathers, too, faced painful limits. They could teach, protect where possible, discipline, joke, carry and love, but they could not control the legal structure surrounding their children. A father might show a boy how to cut wood safely, how to watch the sky for weather, how to move quietly, how to judge a person's intentions by the first few words. He might also know that strength and skill offered no guaranteed shield against sale or punishment. To parent under such conditions required a kind of courage rarely praised in official records. Older children often became essential caretakers. A girl not yet grown may carry a baby on one hip while doing 3 other tasks. A boy may lead younger siblings away from trouble, entertain them, or hush them when adults need silence. This creates maturity that can look impressive from the outside and feel heavy from within. The child becomes competent because someone must. Competence, in such cases, is not freedom. It is duty arriving early. There is also the question of schooling, or rather the deliberate denial of it. Formal education for enslaved children was often discouraged or prohibited, especially as white fears about literacy and resistance deepened. Yet learning did not disappear. Children learned songs, stories, practical skills, kin relations, work patterns, religious language, herbal knowledge, memory practices, and sometimes letters or numbers in secret or by indirect means. Denied official education, they still built intelligence through every available crack in the wall. One fringe tidbit reveals the intensity of white anxiety around knowledge. In some places, even the sight of a black child showing unusual quickness with words or numbers could unsettle slaveholders as though literacy itself were a dangerous spark lying in dry grass. They were not entirely wrong to worry. The ability to read, write, count, or interpret could widen the imagination, sharpen planning, and undermine the story that the oppressed were naturally fitted for bondage. Oppression prefers its victims uninformed. It is one of its least attractive preferences. When children do enter more regular field labour, the change can be abrupt. The sack is smaller at first. Perhaps. The expectations may seem lighter, but the lesson is clear enough. Keep up. Learn quickly. Do not waste time. Do not complain too loudly. The body begins its apprenticeship in monotony and pain. Small hands meet burrs. Bare or poorly shod feet meet hot ground. A child's sense of time collides with a workday far too long for any healthy young life. The rows do not adjust themselves out of pity. This early entrance into labour shapes memory in lasting ways. Adults who later recalled slavery often remembered not only great traumas, but the ordinary sharp details of childhood work. The first time a hand bled in the field. The first time a child was trusted with a task that was really a burden. The sound of the dinner horn. The smell of dusty cotton against the face. The embarrassment of clumsiness under watchful eyes. The pride in small competence. The dread of growing into greater demands. Childhood memory can be painfully precise, and yet children still absorb delight from the world where they can. Fireflies in summer. The taste of something sweet shared unexpectedly. The pleasure of rain on hot skin if one is not forced to work through it. The feel of a clean head wrap. The comfort of lying against a grandparent while listening to a story. The tiny thrill of being praised for a task done well by someone whose approval truly matters. Such moments do not redeem the system. They reveal the resilience of the young heart. There is tactile memory everywhere in this childhood. The rough grain of cabin boards under a small hand. The softness of a patched rag doll. The scratch of corn husks. The warmth of a sibling pressed close at night. The sting of a switch. The heaviness of a water bucket carried too far. The dusty softness of loose cotton before the burr scratches through. Children know the plantation through touch as much as through sight. The deepest cruelty may be that the plantation steals time from childhood, even when it does not yet seize the full labour of the body. A child who must watch, fear, fetch, soothe, carry, and calculate danger is already living partly in the adult world. The innocence is not wholly gone. It flickers in play, in song, in wonder, in mischief. But it is crowded. It does not get the space it deserves. Every year brings the child closer to the rouse, and everyone knows it. So when you picture children in the cotton world of 1830, picture neither little angels floating untouched above suffering, nor tiny adults with no room for joy. Picture real children, dusty, bright, hungry, watchful, inventive, affectionate, frightened, quick to laugh, quick to learn, and forced too soon into usefulness. Picture them carrying babies, chasing chickens, listening at doorways, learning songs, shaping dolls from scraps, and staring toward the fields where older bodies bend under the sun. Their innocence is not absent, it is under siege. Their lives are full of love and play in fragments, but always within a world that keeps measuring how soon each child can be made to work. Even when the day appears orderly from a distance, the plantation is held together by threat. The rows look straight, the cabins stand in place, the wagons move when needed. Cotton gets gathered, weighed, packed, and sent away. A visitor might glance across the scene and imagine discipline, routine, and country efficiency. But beneath that calm arrangement lies a constant pressure of fear. The system does not rely on goodwill, it relies on punishment, surveillance, and the knowledge that force can arrive quickly. That knowledge changes the air long before any blow is struck. You feel it in how voices lower when certain footsteps approach. You feel it in the speed with which a joke dies when the wrong person appears. You feel it when a body stiffens at the sound of a rider coming down the lane. Fear on a plantation is not always loud. Often it is a background current, steady enough that people learn to live around it without ever forgetting it is there. Punishment can take many forms. It might be open and physical, meant to hurt the body and warn everyone watching. It might be the withdrawal of food, privileges, or limited freedoms. It might involve confinement, humiliation, threats against family members, or sale. The genius of cruelty, if one can call it genius, is that it does not depend on one single method. A system of domination works best when punishment feels both specific and unpredictable. You know it exists. You do not always know when or how it will fall. In cotton country, work was measured closely enough that failure, slowness, illness, or resistance could easily be interpreted as defiance. That interpretation was rarely fair, because fairness was never the point. A person might be exhausted, injured, pregnant, grieving, feverish, or half-starved and still be judged by the output demanded. The field did not ask why production dropped. It simply passed the question upward to people with power over the body. The answer often came back as punishment. Historians agree that violence was central to slavery, not accidental to it. The threat of whipping, beating, sale, restraint, and other forms of coercion underpinned the entire labour system. Some enslavers preferred to imagine themselves moderate, as if the absence of daily spectacular cruelty made the institution less violent. That is like claiming a locked cage is kind because it is cleaned occasionally. The violence was structural first. Individual incidents only made it visible. The overseer, where one was employed, often stood at the edge of this structure. He was expected to extract labour, report output, discipline workers, and preserve the owner's control. Some were notoriously brutal. Some relied more on reputation and timing. A few may have imagined themselves professionals managing an enterprise, which is a neat way to describe supervising coercion for pay. Whatever their personal style, they occupied a role shaped by force. The plantation did not hire poets to keep the picking line moving. Even on plantations without a separate overseer, supervision remained intense. The owner, his relatives, hired white staff, or trusted drivers within the enslaved community could all be woven into the chain of command in different ways. This created moral and emotional strain on many levels. Those forced into intermediary roles might gain a little room to protect others at times, or they might be pushed into enforcing demands they did not choose. Power within oppression is rarely simple. It often comes tied to impossible compromises. The possibility of sale darkened all relations. A person did not need to be physically struck that day to feel the weight of that threat. If an owner decided to settle debt, punish defiance, or rearrange labour, A husband might be sold away from a wife, a mother from her child, a sister from her brother. Sale was punishment, financial strategy, and social terror all at once. It made every family bond feel precious and precarious. Love itself had to live under legal insecurity. This is one reason rumour mattered so much. The plantation was full of partial knowledge. Someone heard talk near the big house. Someone noticed a stranger inquiring about prices. Someone saw an account book left open. Someone heard that a trader was in the county. Someone else said patrols were thicker on the road. News came in fragments, often uncertain, yet deeply consequential. People learned to listen carefully, compare details, and judge whether a rumour was merely noise or a warning that required action. Patrols extended fear beyond the plantation boundary. In many parts of the South, white patrols watched roads, demanded passes, stopped black travellers, searched for runaways, and enforced the wider racial order. Night movement carried real danger. Even where patrol activity varied, the larger message was the same. Black mobility was to be monitored, restricted, and punished. The road did not belong equally to everyone. Darkness did not belong equally to everyone either. A scholarly uncertainty remains around how consistently patrol systems functioned from county to county, because enforcement depended on local law, white participation, geography, and the moment. Some areas were watched heavily, others were more uneven, yet inconsistency did not make the danger unreal. In fact, irregular enforcement could make life more unnerving. Predictable control is grim enough. Unpredictable control keeps every sound outside the cabin sharper at night. That nighttime world has its own atmosphere. Once darkness settles, the plantation seems to breathe differently. Trees become masses of shadow. Cabins glow faintly if firelight shows through cracks. Insects fill the air with steady sound. Far off, a dog barks. Closer, a board creaks under shifting weight. The ordinary noises of night can become difficult to separate from signs of approach. A horse in the lane, boots in the yard, a voice outside. Fear teaches the ear to work over time. People often developed careful habits for this reason. Quietly noting who had not returned yet. Watching the mood of an owner or overseer before dusk. Reading whether a conversation near the main house sounded tense. Listening for the tone of hoofbeats. Keeping certain items close. Choosing words carefully after dark. Ordinary domestic life took place beside constant assessment. Safety, when it appeared, was usually relative, never complete. Punishment also worked through spectacle. A public whipping or visible restraint was meant not only to hurt the person targeted, but to instruct everyone else. The message was clear. Obedience is expected. Resistance has a price. The body of one person becomes a warning sign planted in the social field. This is among the coldest facts of slavery. Violence was communicative. It was designed to travel through sight and memory. At the same time, planters often insisted that harsh discipline was regrettable but necessary, using the language of order, laziness, correction, and management. Such language is morally revolting once you strip away the polish. It turns domination into housekeeping. It treats pain as administration. The ability of educated people to describe cruelty in calm business terms is one of history's least charming recurring talents. A more unusual detail appears in the way some enslaved people judged danger through tiny cues others missed. The manner in which a horse was tied, whether the big house candles remained lit unusually late, a stranger's saddle seen in the yard, the difference between ordinary anger and anger sharpened by drink, the silence of the quarters after some rumour spread. Communities under threat become experts in atmosphere. Survival often depends on reading what has not yet been said aloud. Children absorbed this climate too. They learned when adults suddenly became quiet. They learned that some questions should wait. They learned that a parent's tense face at dusk might mean trouble no child could fix. A boy sent to fetch water might notice white men gathered where they were not usually gathered. A girl might sense from her mother's hands that something was wrong long before hearing words. Fear educates early. This uncertainty could press hardest during moments of illness or reduced capacity. What happens if a worker cannot keep up for several days? What if a woman is weakened after childbirth? What if an older person becomes less productive? What if an injury from work limits output? Dependence on the plantation for food and shelter did not create security, because the same authority providing them could punish, neglect, or sell. Vulnerability multiplied precisely where care should have appeared. Historians still debate how much paternalism genuinely softened day-to-day life on some plantations, because enslavers left many self-serving descriptions of their own supposed moderation. Enslaved testimony and the larger structure tell a blunter story. Even where violence was not constant in visible form, the power imbalance remained absolute. A kinder tone does not undo the fact that one person could control another's labour, movement, family stability, and bodily safety. That is not benevolence. It is domination in a softer voice. Yet uncertainty did not erase courage. People still made choices. They met secretly. They planned visits. They protected one another where possible. They withheld information. They interpreted moods. They sought moments of joy. They practiced religion. They pursued love. They sometimes ran. The remarkable thing is not that fear existed. It is that life continued within it, and often against it. Running away, of course, carried terrifying risk. Terrain, dogs, patrols, hunger, weather, betrayal, distance, and the simple challenge of direction all made escape dangerous. Some people fled briefly to visit loved ones or resist a particular punishment, then returned. Others tried for longer absence. A few aimed for permanent freedom. Each case was its own story, shaped by geography and nerve. The important point is that the desire to move beyond surveillance never disappeared, no matter how carefully the system tried to trap it. There is a fringe tidbit worth noting about plantation rumour. Stories of ghosts, signs, curses, or uncanny warnings sometimes circulated through both black and white communities, especially in isolated rural areas. Such beliefs could reflect spiritual traditions, grief, fear, or local storytelling habits. They could also influence behaviour in surprisingly practical ways. A white patrolman reluctant to ride a certain road at night because it was thought haunted might accidentally create a narrow path of safer movement for someone else. History occasionally leaves a gap where superstition blinks and oppression stumbles. Still, no one living in this world could depend on luck alone. The threat of punishment shaped posture, speech, timing, and even silence. It taught people to guard expression, to measure trust, to assess risk constantly. A visit between cabins after dark might be ordinary one night and dangerous the next. A word spoken in confidence might remain safe or might travel. A small act of resistance might pass unnoticed or lead to brutal consequences. Certainty was scarce. That scarcity was itself a weapon. This is what patrols, punishment, and uncertainty did to plantation life. They turned the whole environment into a field of calculation. Not only the rows by day, but the yard at dusk, the road at night, the cabin door, the gathering after supper, the whisper between friends, the look exchanged when news arrived. Threat was never fully separate from ordinary life. It sat inside it, tightening every choice. So when you imagine discipline in the cotton world of 1830, do not picture only the moment of visible violence. Picture the longer shadow it cast. Picture people listening before speaking, watching before moving, storing rumour like tinder, reading danger in hoofbeats and lamplight, fearing sail as much as the lash, and trying to carve out pieces of life inside a structure built from surveillance. The plantation demanded not just labour, but submission through uncertainty, and still, within that uncertainty, people kept thinking, choosing, loving, warning, enduring, and sometimes daring more than the system believed possible. When you finally look up from the daily grind of one plantation and widen your gaze, the rows begin to change meaning. They are still rows of cotton, of course, plants, dirt, white fibre, sun, dust, labour, but they are also lines drawn across a continent, connecting field to river, river to port, port to ocean, ocean to mill, mill to market, market to wardrobe, and wardrobe to polite society. The farther you look, the less isolated the plantation seems, What appears at first to be a local rural world is in fact tied to a vast engine of money, fashion, industry, and power. The cotton fields of 1830 stretch beyond sight in two ways at once. They stretch physically across expanding southern land, and they stretch economically into places their pickers will never see. The rows do not end at the fence. They continue in account books, shipping records, commercial letters, insurance papers, warehouse receipts, textile machinery, and the soft garments worn by strangers oceans away. Every boll pulled from the plant carries a destination imagined by someone else. This larger view matters because the suffering in the field was not accidental, and it was not merely regional, it fed a global appetite. Cotton cloth had become increasingly central to everyday life in Britain, the United States, and other markets because it was versatile, washable, and often cheaper than older textile options. Industrial mills wanted steady supplies of raw fibre. Merchants wanted reliable shipments. Consumers wanted affordable goods. The field in front of you served all three desires at once, though the people demanding the cloth rarely stood in the dust to consider the arrangement too closely. The American South was remade by this demand. Forests were cleared. Indigenous lands, seized through force and policy, were open to white settlement and plantation agriculture. New counties formed, roads, river traffic, and market towns grew around the movement of cotton. Enslaved people were sold into these developing regions in huge numbers. The landscape itself became a map of expansion driven by white fibre and black labour. When people later spoke admiringly of growth, they usually forgot to mention exactly whose lives had been uprooted to make that growth possible. That expansion created a new sort of confidence among slaveholders. Cotton seemed to promise endless prosperity, and prosperous people can become very loud in defending their moral illusions. By 1830, many Southern elites were not apologizing for slavery. They were building political and cultural arguments around it with increasing boldness. Wealth from cotton gave them influence in state houses, in Congress, in banks, in newspapers, and in ordinary local life. The field was not just a workplace. It was the base of a political order. This is one reason the cotton rows reached beyond sight. They reached into law, the ability to hold people as property, to move them by sale, to discipline them by force, to prevent their education, to restrict their movement. All of this required legal support and public enforcement. Courts, legislatures, militias, patrols, and local customs helped keep the field productive. The plant did not rule alone. Governments and communities helped guard its profits. There is a particular cruelty in how ordinary consumers could remain comfortably distant from these facts. A finished bolt of cotton cloth on a merchant's shelf does not smell like sweat or dust. It smells like commerce. A clean white shirt does not show the scratches on the fingers that gathered its fibre. A printed calico dress does not announce the cries of a child left behind in the quarters while a mother laboured at harvest. Goods travel outward stripped of their history, while the profits cling tightly to those already powerful. Historians agree that cotton was central to the rise of the 19th century Atlantic economy, though they continue to debate exactly how to weigh the contributions of plantation slavery. Industrial innovation, financial systems, and consumer culture against one another. But no serious reading of the period can separate cotton wealth from enslaved labour. The mills mattered, the ships mattered, the banks mattered. None of them erase the human beings in the rows. Without forced labour, the scale and price of cotton production would have been profoundly different. In the United States, cotton also helped tie northern and southern interests together in uncomfortable ways. Northern merchants financed shipments. Northern ships carried goods. Northern textile mills processed southern fibre. Northern consumers bought cotton cloth. It was convenient for many people to imagine slavery as a distant southern peculiarity, while still benefiting from its output. Convenience has always been one of the most persuasive political arguments, though it rarely admits that it is making an argument at all. Britain offers a similar contradiction. Textile mills there transformed raw cotton into finished goods on an industrial scale, and British public life contained strong currents of anti-slavery sentiment, yet British factories still depended heavily on slave-grown American cotton. Moral discomfort and commercial appetite lived side by side with surprising ease. A person can oppose cruelty in the abstract and still appreciate a cheap shirt in practice. Humans are very flexible when profit enters the room. You can also see how cotton shaped class far beyond the plantation. Wealthy planters used crop profits to build houses, furnish rooms, send sons to school, influence politics, and secure marriages. Middlemen in towns and cities built their own lives on commission, transport, and credit. Mill owners invested in machinery. Workers in factories, including women and children, laboured long hours turning cotton into textiles. Consumers purchased the results. The chain crossed class lines, but not equally. Some people handled the money, others handled the suffering. One scholarly uncertainty concerns how fully contemporaries grasped the entire connected system. Individual participants often saw only their section of it. A factor in New Orleans might think mainly about prices and quality. A spinner in Manchester might think about wages and machinery. A small-town shopper might think about affordability. A planter might think about debt and acreage. The enslaved picker, however, had the least power and bore the most direct burden. Sometimes the clearest moral knowledge sits closest to pain, even when it has the least public authority. A striking detail of the era is how cotton entered everyday life quietly. It became shirts, dresses, underclothes, bedding, sacks, work garments, handkerchiefs, curtains, and countless other objects too ordinary to attract deep reflection. That ordinariness is important. Luxuries can provoke moral questions because they seem extravagant. Necessities slip past scrutiny because they feel natural. Once cotton became ordinary, the labour behind it became easier for distant people to ignore. The landscape itself changed under this pressure. Continuous cultivation exhausted soil. New land was sought. Old fields thinned and failed. Planters responded not by questioning the system, but by pushing farther into fresh territory when they could. Expansion and exhaustion went together. Cotton ate land almost as surely as it ate human strength. The rows looked permanent while they were in fact part of an often restless and extractive geography. There is a bitter irony here. The cotton plant is a biological thing, seasonal and fragile, dependent on weather, pests, timing, and soil. Yet around it grew one of the harshest claims of social permanence in American history. Slaveholders built grand theories of racial hierarchy and natural order around a crop that could be damaged by a storm, a worm, or a shift in market price. The confidence of power often rests on surprisingly delicate roots. The domestic slave trade kept feeding this growth. Traders moved people south and west toward the cotton frontier, breaking old ties and creating new communities under duress. A field in Mississippi or Alabama in 1830 might hold people born in Virginia, Maryland, the Carolinas, or elsewhere, carrying songs, memories, speech patterns, farming knowledge, and grief from many landscapes. The cotton world was therefore both local and forcibly mobile. The rows seemed stable, but the people within them had often been displaced violently to make them possible. A quirky but revealing tidbit is that some visitors from Europe or the North could be stunned by the visual grandeur of plantation landscapes while missing, or refusing to dwell on the human reality sustaining them. Long avenues, broad rivers, white houses, ordered fields, glowing sunsets over cotton. It was all very picturesque if one had the moral imagination of a decorative spoon. Scenery can flatter injustice when viewed from a veranda, yet the truth kept leaking through. Abolitionists published narratives. Formerly enslaved people testified. Travellers noticed scars, heard stories, witnessed sales, or sensed fear in the quarters. Political arguments about slavery intensified. Religious critics denounced the institution. Enslaved people themselves resisted through work slowdowns, running away, sabotage, secrecy, religious community, and survival. The Cotton Empire was powerful, but it was never morally secure. It required constant defense because its contradictions were enormous. Those contradictions sat inside the American Republic itself. A nation that spoke of liberty relied heavily on an export economy built by people denied liberty. Politicians praised independence while protecting human bondage. Citizens celebrated opportunity while millions had no recognized claim to the fruits of their own labor. Cotton sharpened these contradictions because it made slavery more profitable, more entrenched, and harder for powerful people to surrender voluntarily. Money gave hypocrisy better clothing. When you imagine the endless rows, then you should imagine more than physical repetition. Each row stands for a repeated transfer: labor into profit, pain into product, land into exhaustion, family into collateral, human skill into someone else's status, local work into global trade. The field becomes a machine not because gears are visible in the dirt, but because every part of the wider world is ready to receive what the field extracts. At the same time, the rows also contain another kind of legacy, one not intended by the men who profited from them. The people who labored there shaped American music, language, foodways, spirituality, kinship practices, craft traditions, agricultural knowledge, and moral memory in ways that endured far beyond the plantation system itself. Their suffering mattered, certainly. Their creativity mattered too. History sometimes reduces enslaved people to victims alone, as if oppression defined the total sum of their existence. It did not. They were makers of culture even where their freedom was denied. Historians still argue over how best to describe the relationship between slavery and modern capitalism, whether slavery should be seen as outside modernity, as a precursor to it, or as deeply woven into its development. The debate can become technical. Standing in the cotton world of 1830, the practical answer feels blunt. This was modern enough where it counted. Measured output, disciplined labor, credit networks, global markets, political lobbying, technological change, expanding consumption. The only supposedly old-fashioned part was the insistence that human beings could be owned. Even that, sadly, proved quite compatible with commercial sophistication. By widening the view, you also see that the cotton field was never only about the South. It was about empire, industry, race, class, and the moral habits of ordinary people who accepted comfort without asking enough questions. A sheet on a bed in Liverpool, a dress in Boston, a ledger in New Orleans, a mill in Manchester, a bank loan in New York, a riverboat on the Mississippi, a cabin in Alabama. These were not separate worlds. They were linked by the same white fibre passing hand to hand. So the rows reached beyond sight because their consequences did. They reached into family histories, national politics, global commerce, and the material habits of daily life. They reached into the forests cut down to plant more acreage, and into the ships that crossed the Atlantic loaded with compressed bales. They reached into speeches defending slavery and into whispers praying for deliverance. They reached into elegant parlours and overcrowded cabins. They reached into the future. And now, as the darkness settles softly over these fields in your mind, the vast machinery of cotton begins to quiet. The sacks are still. The rows lose their hard edges. The dust settles back into the earth. The heat drains from the leaves, and the sky above the plantation turns deep and still. You let the wider world drift farther away now. The ports grow faint, the mills go silent, the ledgers close, the ships fade into the dark water. What remains is the land itself, breathing under the night air, and the memory of the people who moved through it with tired hands and unbroken inner lives. You picture the cabins with their dim firelight, their low voices, their children finally asleep, their elders resting sore limbs, their songs thinning into murmurs. You picture the fields no longer as lines of profit, but as ground that witnessed endurance, tenderness, intelligence, and grief. The cotton no longer flashes white in the sun. It softens into shadow, and as the night deepens, everything slows. The insects keep their patient rhythm. A breeze passes lightly over the rows. The earth holds the warmth of the day, then gradually releases it. The people who laboured here deserve, at last in this quiet telling, a gentler silence than the world gave them. So you let the scene dim further. The fences blur. The trees become still shapes against a dark sky. The cabins rest close together. The endless rows disappear into the calm, not erased. but finally allowed to fade into softness. You breathe a little more slowly, the field grows quiet, the night grows kind, and the story settles, like dust after a long day, into rest.